Welcome to another show of the Research to Reps Roundtable. I'm your co-host, Pat Ivey, and we have Dr. Ted Lambinides. How you doing, Ted?
I'm doing great, Pat. How are you doing today?
Oh, doing great. We've got an interesting dynamic here, right? We've got two guests, but I'm going to say we've got four co-hosts on this edition of the Research to Reps Roundtable because we have Coach Duane Carlisle and we have Scott Hopson as well. Scott, did I leave off a handle? Did I leave off Doctor?
Oh, no. The only handles I have aren't, you can't say them.
Well, this is going to be good. So I'm excited to dive deep. I don't know where this is going to go, but I know we're going to go somewhere pretty fast and go deep. So without further ado, I want to first bring in Coach Duane Carlisle. Duane, what's going on?
Hey, life, working, trying to make people better.
Oh, that's not, I mean, is that part-time, full-time? I don't know.
Yeah, that's all the time. That's all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
Awesome. Miss Scott, how you doing? How's everything going?
I'm good, my man. Much like Duane, coaching, teaching. And I'm out at a conference in Las Vegas right now. And my better half, my wife, is receiving an award right now. And I got my time zones wrong. So I'm kind of in the wrong room, but we'll let that one go.
Oh, wow. You know, I've done something like that before. So, you know, we better make it worth your while and get after this. So I'm going to throw out the first question. What is it that you're working on, we're working on, we should be working on? What are some of those things that you think are difference makers in what you're doing and for the people around you? Who's first?
Oh, I'm pointing the finger at Mr. Carlisle right there.
Oh,
Coach.
man. Well, man, you just served me up. I hope I can hit a Serena 118-mile return on. But, whoa. For me, having had a broad range of experiences from professional, collegiate, high school, private sector, what we're working on is to bring things to simplicity. Right? I think things have gotten way too complex as it relates to the training field, how we deliver it, how we position it. Man, it's just incredibly convoluted with information. And so for us, what we've tried to do is simplify it to a point where focusing on what really matters, like what really matters. And that obviously varies based on the population that you're working with, as well as the level that they're trying to get to. But I think at the end of the day, the key element to helping to raise one's performance is taking that person where they are and then bringing them to where they want to go. How you do that and the path that you choose, I mean, that's up for debate. However, I will say this, that as I go along on my journey, which is really never stopped because I just have such a passion for coaching, a guy like Scott Hopson has been super influential in helping to, educate me around things that, I was certainly uncomfortable with. I mean, things like biointegrity and things of that nature, right? So I'm gonna pass it on to Scott, and Big Scott, back at you. Go ahead and continue.
I think that was a little drop shot. I served you an ace, but you drop shotted it back.
Hey, man, that's what we do. That's what we do. That's what the vets do.
Well, I concur 100%, and that's not surprising. And I mean, we may respectfully disagree on a whole host of things, but we share two things in common, which is an open mind and an open heart. I think, to piggyback on what you said, making the complex simple first actually requires you understand the complex. That's the paradox. You have to first, that relentless pursuit of mastery gets more and more complex, but the killer skill set of a world-class coach or teacher or professor is to now say, hey, there's these infinite ingredients, but here's the recipe, and the recipe will change instantaneously the minute your patient, client, athlete, or team walk in the room. And whether it's a neck up or neck down factor, the recipe just changed. So master the ingredients, but become really great at creating on demand. How do you make that complex simple? And it is a relentless journey for me. And I think you're probably, I know you're the same, Duane, and I think the other two gentlemen are, or they won't be on here, is we have this relentless curiosity. You can't have a passion for understanding the complex unless you're really curious about this thing called health and human performance. And so I think that's what we're doing really excitingly right now, is can we take the research, can we take the technology, can we take the infinitely growing data, which can actually get overwhelming, and then we miss the person in the middle, and say, right, given all those ingredients, what's the one next recipe that makes an impact right here, right now? Because you can have your 4-year periodized Olympic cycle. How many times are you realistically gonna have to rewrite that? Like hundreds, because everything changes. So I think, I really do think creating on demand and having that courage is probably one of the most exciting things going on. And for me personally, it means anchoring to principles and not techniques, because techniques are just infinite. Can't remember them all, even if you tried. Principles is actually not that many. So being like real masters of principles, I think, is a very exciting time to be in this industry.
Hey, Duane, with some of the consulting you would do with, say, collegiate teams and the changing environment of the college landscape with the transfer portal, long-term athlete development is problematic. What advice have you given to these strength coaches that might have a player for 6 to 12 months?
Well, talk about complex. when you look at today's landscape as it relates to the collegiate athlete, the goal is always to create quadrennial plan. You want to assume that they're going to be there for 4 or 5 years, and you want to be able to map things out in a way that you're progressively improving athletic capacities for those given athletes based on their maturation, based on their competitive performance, their maturity, their training age obviously grows as they mature up the ladder. However, there's so many pieces to it that impact the process of a coach putting together a plan. One of the things being is working with other coaches. I've been through coaching changes. I know that Dr. Pat Ivey's been through coaching changes, and you're taking them one way, one direction, and you have the support, and everybody, all the stakeholders are at the table when you originally put things together, and everybody's all in with the game plan. And it's not just the athletic development plan, it's the holistic plan of developing that athlete's performance. And then boom, coach gets fired, coach leaves for another job, things change, another coordinator may come in. If we're talking football, things are always changing. It's a constantly changing environment. So I say all that is because it's an incredibly complex process, but in the perfect world, ideally, you have a coach who's there for an extended period of time. You have an administration that is supportive, and they're there for an extended period of time, and everybody buys into a plan, and then you can put together things accordingly. So my advice to coaches would be, one, you have to be adaptable, and you have to be able to adjust all the time. It's just like what Scott just talked about as it relates to being able to coach on demand. I mean, you have to be able to, a coach could come into a room and say, why are they doing that? Right? What are they doing? And it puts you in a position where, if you got some clout with that coach and you can have a discussion with them, great. However, head coach says, I don't like this, you got to shift gears. So I hope that answers part of the question, Ted.
Yeah.
When I was coaching, I had some really good coaches on staff, and we had developed a system that was multi-level. And so it didn't matter where you were, you entered the system at ground zero. And then you may not get all the way to the top floor before you graduate. It depends on a lot of factors. And what we were able to do is, if you've got a transfer that comes in, they still come in at ground zero. Now, they may only be at ground zero for a week, and you realize, oh, this is a special athlete. Don't need to teach them techniques. They're good with their body weight, body control. And wow, second week, I realized they're strong enough to play the position. Let me elevate them to the next level. They may be 1 month into the training program, but the other transfer that came in was not ready, and they're not strong enough and really didn't have a good training program. So they entered at the same point. One elevated a few levels over a short period of time. One stayed. So I took that down to Arkansas State to see if it will work, because we had a lot of transfers from Division I, and had this one particularly strong individual. He ended up being a free agent or a late round draft pick by I believe by the Rams or the Chargers, one of the LA teams. And he came in, they told me how many times he could do 225. And I said, I have to see it. I mean, I don't know if I believe you that someone coming into a program can do it 40 plus times. And pretty much I realized within the first workout during a warm up, I said, okay, he's strong enough to play his position. So I'm going to go ahead and progress you to a level up and have you lifting with some older guys. Whereas he got there at the same time with some incoming freshmen. Well, they stayed at that entry level. And so I think your system can address it, but you've got to be able, like you said, adapt and adjust. But if your system can be built to address that and adapt and adjust, I think it puts you further ahead. I want to go back to something you said earlier, Duane. You said the complex, making it simple. I remember being at a national conference one time. I was on a panel discussion and someone asked the question, what do you do to help your football players gain weight? Complex, right? I mean, calories. I mean, you can make it simple. You can make it, it's a lot of variables, a lot of factors. And I remember just holding up my water bottle and saying, water. It's like, water? That's it? Like, get out. They were like, get out of here. You don't want to give up the secrets. Like, seriously, break it all the way down. Break down intracellular, break down weight gain, break down how much muscle is water, break down hydration, like break down water all the way down and tell me how important is it to weight gain, staying injury free because you're hydrated, like being able to continue to train, keeping your body temperature cool so that you can do more. Like, that's something that's pretty complicated, but how can you break it down that's simple? But sometimes people don't believe it. Like, you could simplify it and they don't believe it. Like, no, it's got to be harder than that. No, it can be, and I can make myself sound really smart, but it's really that simple. What are your thoughts, Scott?
A lot. I'll pick one or two. First of all, with the hydration and water, I would expand that and say, we like to throw out there 75 to 85% water, but actually we're excluding a lot of other fluids in the body that are based on that water, in particular lymphatic. If you're dehydrated, what it will do to your lymphatic system, and that in turn, what that does to every connective tissue in the body, your immune system, your gut, your sleep, is profound. And then you've got your blood. That's no small deal either. So I would expand and say fluids. We need to make sure that the highways of your body, the fluids that keep your battery charged, are the number one priority, along with nutrition and sleep hygiene, right? Because if you're not sleeping enough and you're not eating the right fuel for you, whatever that is, and you don't have the right capacity for fluids, why are we talking about mobility, stability, strength, movement quality? How are you going to move with quality if every tissue in your body is dehydrated? Your fascia literally becomes stuck to itself. So I think it can get so complex, but I would say yes to that. The other thing that comes up is where in the cycle of the season you get these new athletes. So for example, we're in Brazil a lot right now, working with high-level professional soccer teams. This is insane. Soccer now, it used to be seasonal. It's all year long. It goes from January to the end of December. They get 3 weeks off at the end of December, and then they go again. The more successful you are, the more competitions you're in. So our team are in 4 competitions. They're playing 3 competitive 90 to 120-minute matches per week. And now if they have to go mid-season and buy 3-4 stud players from the Premier League in the UK or Serie A in Italy or whatever, you're now paying $100 to $200 million to bring 4 or 5 new players in halfway through the season. Well, do I, as a strength conditioning coach, have time to ramp them up? No, I don't. And, now I have to consider the sports medicine team, the sports science team, the technical tactical team, including the head coach, as to what they want to get from this player in 5 seconds because they got a match in 2 days. So we can look at all the science of recovery and regeneration, -1, +1, either side of a game, -2, +2. But if you're playing every 48 hours, it's a moot point. You're playing before you're recovered. So
Scott, how do you go about it?
fascinating.
So talk to me. Talk to us. How do you go about working with that player who comes in mid-season? You got 48 hours. What is your thought process to integrating that person into the performance component?
No, what I'm realizing now, I'm one part of the wheel. Collaboration is everything. I have to not only trust, but respect that the sports medicine team know what they're talking about, even if I disagree with some of it, that the sports science have data that's valid, credible, and applicable, whether it's internal or external training loads, right? Then I have to go to the technical tactical team and say, right, what's their position? What are you working on in the field this week? Is it short-sided game, long-sided games? What's your work to rest ratio, or what they call stimulus to pause? All of these things dictate the very next thing I can do. So number one, what's their history? Are they coming from return to play? If they just recovered from ACL, or are they good to go? How many games have they just played at the other club before they flew across the world and joined this club? Where do they fit into the next cycle of soccer for us? Are they playing in this competition, the midweek competition, or the Saturday, Sunday competition? Like, we literally have to create on demand every single phase of training. But the biggest guiding principles will be our sports science feedback, physiological load. What's the internal stress response to the external load they're getting in training, practice, competition? And that's before, during, and after. So at the elite level, everybody's got their heart rate monitors on, and we're getting real-time data as to, oh, shut that player down now, because they've already hit their training load for the session in 20 minutes. Okay, but we don't always get that privilege. My high school rugby kids, I don't have GPS trackers. I've got 28 kids on the south side of Chicago running around on a Tuesday night. I have to make more subjective calls. But I think the primary thing is, how are they responding to stress right now, internally, based on the external load I'm putting on them? That has to be one of the guiding principles.
So what if we zoom out, right? Because you touched on something that's critically important. And I think it's a skill set that is lacking amongst young professionals, and for those who may be deep into the game. And that's learning how to collaborate across the board, right? So everybody, wants a little piece. That player comes in, everybody wants a little piece of him, right? And you mentioned all these different components, these supporting components that's going to help ultimately drive performance with that athlete. Now, how do you communicate across the board? And then secondly, how do you communicate with the athlete? Like, the athlete is they're coming from a new environment. They don't know you. They don't know the sports science department, sports med, so forth, right? I would think that a big component is building that trust and creating the communication lines, open those communication lines to understand kind of a little bit about that person and where they want to go. Does anyone have any answers in terms of how they two things? One, how you communicate across the board with different stakeholders, and then two, how do you approach the athlete to build that trust as you try to transition them into a new environment?
I'm looking at Ted, and I know he works with a lot of teams, and I think he's seen a lot. Ted, what does it look like with some of those teams that do it well versus those? What are those characteristics and qualities of those teams that don't do it so well?
I think it's what Scott and Duane have already hit on, and that is the teams that do it well. You literally see, those different components, departments of the team sitting down throughout the day, meeting and discussing each player's needs. Mm-hmm. And I think, so it's a player-centric model. And I think the players are the ones that gain the trust when they see that type of collaboration in person. It's just not like, hey, this guy sent me a text or an email about you. No, there's direct dialogue, meetings that the players can actually see it going on. And I think it's the discussing of the information that Scott had alluded to, and there's a why for the player to follow.
All right, so that's what it looks like when it's done well, and I think most people would agree. But when it's not being done well, why is it not being done well?
Oh, I'll get the party started on this one. Number one, ego, and attached to that is fear. You can't separate them. It's either the fear that I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to kind of not ask for help, or it's fear that what I might be told conflicts with my own belief of system of what I think is right. And I think that's one of the biggest boundaries we've had in the past that's getting better now, is true collective intelligence. That everyone has something valuable to bring to the recipe. And that's one of the primary things you should look for as a director or leader of those groups, is who's actually listening, who's willing to consider the fact that their point of view might not only be wrong, but someone else's is better. They're not always the same thing. And I love what Ted said. The player needs to tangibly see and feel that all the stakeholders in their performance is visually saying, hey, here's the plan for you. What do you think about that? Again, going back to Brazil, but with my rugby in Chicago, at every practice, the athletic trainer's there, the sports science person's there, the technical coach meets with the quote fitness team before they even start their practice or warm up to say, here's what we're working on today. Here's the field size I'm using with this many players because I'm after this kind of external load. And then the sports science person will say, but if you do that, you can only do it for 20 minutes because we had added extra time in the game 2 days ago. Oh, and then the strength conditioning coach saying, well, this is how I'm going to change the warm up to get them ready for that. Here's how I'm going to tweak the recovery to recover for. It's an in the moment, create on demand. And it builds trust. One of the biggest fears that performance coaches have is that when I got to have A to Z already planned out, or it looks like I don't know what I'm doing. Actually, the world-class people look like they don't know what they're doing because they're like, hey, stop, press pause. What do you think? How should I change this? I think the better a coach is, the more they're willing to say, I'm not sure if this is the best plan. Let's try it and then tweak it in the moment. I think that's the highest level you can go, in my opinion.
So we have some professionals out there that are listening to this and going like, yeah, that sounds great, but you don't know my situation. And they're thinking like how, and they want their situation to change and evolve. And Scott, I know that you do, there's pivotalcoaching.com. Would they reach out to someone like you or Duane or Ted and say, hey, can you come in and have a conversation with us and take a look at what we're doing? I mean, is that what you do?
Yeah, it's a big part of what we do is we coach around our own teams, but we consult for other organizations, right? Sharing best practices. That's really what it is. I think, some will, some won't, but an awful lot of people wait. And sometimes we confuse the waiters for the won'ts. It's like when we're at a conference or a workshop and the people in the back, their arms crossed and they look like they're not interested. Actually, they are. Often there's a lot of cognitive dissonance going on. They're like, well, what you just said makes sense. But now that means, my gosh, I might have to change some stuff, or I need time to process that, or I need help because that looks like a better way, but I don't know how to do that. And what often comes across as resistance is actually just ambivalence. They got two opposing thought processes in their mind. And they need someone to look at them and go, yeah, me too, mate. Come this way, we'll work it out together. I think the relationship, collaboration piece is the guts of everything, because I couldn't do what I do without so many mentors in my life that I had to put my hand up and say, I kind of understand what you're saying, but I don't know how to do that. Can you show me? And I think our industry doesn't always make it easy to reach out and say, actually, I need help.
I think what you were talking about, Scott, is that everything once planned, but you talked about being fluid, changing on the go. And in sports, a lot of times that's applauded because that coach is great. He makes great halftime adjustments.
There you go.
So the same thing should be said for the performance and sports medicine staff. You've got to make halftime adjustments.
That's a great, I love that. I'm stealing that. That will be on one of my slides in my next keynotes will be, and I'll quote you. But you're right. We applaud the courage to say that didn't work, but I think we've got a solution. That's a brilliant way of putting it, Ted. I love that. What are you thinking, Duane?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it is predicated on culture. It's the culture that is built within the environment where people have that freedom to be able to exercise their courage, whether regardless of how it's going to be perceived, right? That you can actually say something in terms of, you don't think something's like, think about it. If I'm driving down the highway and somebody's in my passenger seat and I swerve to the left, I would want them to grab the wheel. Well, in other environments, people are like, hey, you know what? Keep swerving, buddy. Keep swerving. You know, you just, I'm glad you're going to get hit. Right? That's how it is oftentimes in some people's environments. And a lot of it has to do with culture. And if you've created a culture where there's all the stakeholders are unified in terms of what the collective objective is, then you got a chance. But it goes back to what you said, Scott, ego. When people let their ego get into the way, right? And you have all these people that have their own agendas, and it's like the crab. We've often heard this analogy. There's a crab in the barrel, right? One's trying to get out, the other one pulls it down. Another one trying to get out, another one's pulling it down. And everybody's trying to protect their turf and protect their jobs because they have a high-paying job. And everyone, for whatever reason, they're not all in, right? They may say it and they know how to play the game, but when it comes down to it, you get the locker room lawyers. Pss, 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 pss. Hey, what do you think about this? Pss, 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 pss. Right? They don't have the courage to sit at the table and put their thoughts out there and have everybody contribute to it and make it a 1 + 1 = 3 type of scenario. But this goes back to what Dr. Ivey said. You know, what happens when it doesn't look good? Like, we know ideally how we want it to look, but when it doesn't look good because the culture is bad, that's when it's a great challenge.
Yeah. Now, I've been in meetings and the head coach would say, don't confuse me with the facts. I already have my mind made up. So
yeah.
That's when you just sit there and go, okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, coach.
That's interesting. I'm trying to think of a quote I heard today. It said, don't confuse feelings for facts. I don't know if that fits here, but a lot of people get their feelings hurt and they get inside of their feelings and that prevents change or growth or adaptation. And you know, to go along with ego, like you mentioned earlier, Scott, some people don't want to hurt other people's feelings. Some people don't want their feelings hurt. And it's just easier to go with the flow, the status quo.
It's interesting. I'm going back to, again, what Ted said, using sport as the analogy. You know, in rugby, I mean, a lot of sports are like this. Once the players are on the pitch, the coach doesn't get to communicate with them. There's a reason you have captains, because they have to make sure that the team who have practiced the strategies and variations of what could happen based on the opposition, whether it rains, whether it's sunny, whether we get someone sent off, bad refereeing, all those contingencies are to be led by the captain and the leadership on the field. I see them 40 minutes later when they come off. And when they get into the locker room, the first 10 minutes is not me. It's the players coaching each other on, hey, we ran that play, it didn't work. Why? Oh my gosh, the opposition's killing us out wide. What are we going to do to defend that? We encourage our players to coach their own teammates. And yet we as professionals don't authentically, how many coaches could say, I myself have a coach? It could be in business, could be in life, could be a mentor in your spiritual growth, or hopefully it would be in the industry too. It'll be someone that's achieved what you're desiring, that you've gone and given time, energy, and money to say, hey, I'll coach you. But we just assume our clients, athletes, and patients, we can coach them. But we've kind of forgotten what it is to be coached. And so it's hard to empathize, right? And show up with vulnerability and authenticity if we don't actually know what it is they're going through. It almost seems like a requirement that you should be mentored as a coach on your journey. Just like doctors, I just became a surgeon. Great, you're a resident underneath this person. There's a chief of surgery. It's kind of like we get certified into the industry and we don't think we need coaching as coaches. That's one of my observations, and it's a big problem, you know?
The amount of chess an administrator has to play to get one of their coaches help is absurd. There's a perception that these two can't really communicate or understand one another when it comes to development or performing at a high level. Like, coaches don't necessarily assume an administrator is at the top of their game. And then there's, on the opposite side, administrators a lot of times don't assume that they can help a coach improve their game, like not the X's and O's, but the leadership part, the communication, the collaboration, the mindset. It's amazing how the top leaders a lot of times in an organization don't necessarily look to help each other, because for whatever reason. But that's the opposite, I think, of what you were describing, Scott, of how leaders on the field in that particular sport, where the captains are taking control and assuming, like, that type of environment, I think, is one where they do challenge coaches and the coaches are challenging them, and people in the organization are challenging each other versus, well, this person makes millions of dollars a year as the head coach, and they're not really open to suggestions.
It's interesting. It comes back to Duane's point about culture, ultimately, right? Because other industries, multi-billion-dollar industries, technology, whatever, they evolve through recombinant innovation. They actively seek outside intelligence to upgrade their game. I mean, just look at this thing, the phone today. I mean, it's inconceivable 20 years ago that this is just normal, but it didn't come from people thinking the same way they always thought. It came from some kind of divergent thinking that said, hey, what are these other industries doing? And why do they always keep high performing and we're not? Our industry is getting better. There's a lot of potential there, but I think we lack that willingness to look outside of our bubble and say, hey, how can other industries and leaders come in and maybe tell us how we can upgrade our game? Because I'm sure it's even more difficult to run a $200 trillion company in whatever it may be than 28 guys on a rugby pitch. I'm sure you've got a lot to teach me about leadership and communication and when it's time to change direction, because your industry doesn't look anything like it did 20 years ago. How did you do that?
And Scott, that is such a unbelievable point. I spend probably 30% of my coaching time with just those people that you just talked about.
Yeah.
Right. And I can't disclose due to my non-disclosure agreements with them, but I have like 6 CEOs, founders of companies who have been super, super successful. One in particular, when I started with them 5 years ago, the company had 400 employees. They have over 10,000 employees. And just this morning, we're having a conversation. We had to switch our time. And he told me that he had a meeting with his managers. And I said, how many managers do you have? He said, 1,200. And I said, how many different countries did those managers come from? 30. Well, what is unbelievable about that? You look at, we use that term underpinnings often. What has, because I've been with them and I've talked to them throughout this whole process. And the number one thing he points to is creating a culture, like you said, Scott, of innovation, thinking outside the box, bringing a team of people that think differently, bringing a team of people that are going to work side by side collectively to accomplish a goal, and then mobilizing those people to be able to work on one accord so that ultimately whatever the objective is met. and the communication that they have it's just unbelievable. The amount of retreats that the leadership team goes to, they not only get feedback from their management team, but they also get feedback they have a customer appreciation weekend where they invite their customers to an event that they put on, and they have presentation, but more importantly, they're getting feedback from their customers about their product. And I think that those are just brilliant ways of how you, at the end of the day, it's about how you get better, right? How you get better, how we get better. And so I have a whole different way of thinking now, just from being part of that experience and being able to tap into that type of knowledge. Because in our industry, oftentimes it's like everyone's like, right? They're all like guarding what they have, and nobody wants to share, and nobody wants to like really engage in authentic communication that's going to promote, change and challenge one another in good ways to help move things forward.
That's deep. That's deep. And a lot of times we will use quotes from business people, but when it comes to
Thinking like it
and actually bringing them in to challenge, giving them enough access to our inner workings and to give them permission to challenge and raise up other ideas about how things can get done. We kind of draw the line there. Like we'll read a book about from a well-known leader,
Right.
but someone that that person who wrote the book about, we won't necessarily bring them in and say, okay, your company has 10,000 employees, and we are constantly trying to work on our culture. What can we do? What do you see? A lot of times we draw the line there, especially in sport, in the areas where I've worked before, and a lot of other people.
Interesting. We could even shrink that bubble and say, if that's too scary, why don't we just do it in our own industries? Why don't we look at other organizations and institutions that seem to be performing consistently at a higher level than the ones we're involved in? They seem to have lower injury rates. Their return to play protocols seem to be faster. They've got less people, on the bench injured at the end of the season than me. They're in 3 competitions and they keep winning. Why don't you just pick up the phone and say, dude, please come and tell us how you did that. I'm willing to pay you. Like, I'm sure we use the same ingredients. We're elite level professional soccer, rugby, Olympics. Like, we've all got GPS, we've all got internal, external, we've all got heart rate variability, we've all got TRIMP, but you clearly have made a recipe with the same ingredients I've got. And you somehow took the flour, the yeast, the water, and the milk and made bread, and mine turned into a donut. Could you show me how to make bread? I'm not, there's clearly some simple things that I could do. Why don't we do that? It seems inconceivable that that's not difficult, right? So I think it has to be mindset, maybe even bigger than that. I think the culture, yes, but also it's so scary to be vulnerable, especially in the industry we've created over the last 30, 40 years. Very scary to say, I'm at an NSCA conference. I have no idea what that person just said. Is anyone want to explain that to me? I'll buy your coffee. You just won't see it. I'm confused all the time. All the time.
How about this? In our industry, right? The poor manufacturers of equipment that we purchase, oftentimes they're restricted from telling another organization that they have the equipment. Like when you're in it, you think about it, you're like, okay, well, I won't say anything, I won't. Or on the flip side, right? Let's say I'm working for an organization and I tell the equipment vendor, you can't say to anybody that I have this piece of equipment, because we look at it as a competitive advantage, right? Yet that equipment vendor, manufacturer who created this great product, they can't say anything to anybody outside of the industry. We all know who gets thus and such equipment, but they can't say anything. Like, think about that. That's just absolutely asinine. It's insane that you can't have that kind of conversation.
It's interesting. The more we
is
talk
great.
about it, it's not the sets and reps, it's not the load, it's not the periodization. I mean, how many years, I'd love to ask this question, how many years authentically of study and experience do you guys think a coach needs before we should be able to say, yeah, I'm pretty sure you know how to run a weight room. I'm pretty sure you know the difference between strength, power, speed, endurance. You know, how long before we should say, you should know the A's to Z's of movement coaching and program? There's always going to be little upgrades, but it's not going to be a huge change. It's not. Just look at research. Every now and then you have a groundbreaking breakthrough, but for the most part, our guidelines, our principles haven't changed much in 20 years. They're just tweaked every now and then. How long would you think that should take before a professional performance coach says, right, enough of that, I need to learn about these things instead? This is clearly going to take me. How long do you think someone should be in the industry before they shift?
That's a tough one, because a lot of times in the United States, when I was coming up as a strength and conditioning coach, we were athletes. And so you had 4 or 5 years in a particular system where that went into your experience. And then a lot of us, we did not have exercise science backgrounds because it wasn't something that we could do. It wasn't available. And now you have a lot more access to that in undergrad, but a lot of students may not have the Division I athlete experience. So I think there's different ways to count how much experience you do need. I don't know how to quantify exactly the years. I mean, if you ask me to you got to throw a number out there. I don't know, 10. I'm just the number, just to throw it out there. Anyone
What do you
else?
think, Ted?
You're going to say 10, Duane? Is that what you said?
No, I said, what do you think, Ted?
I would say it may not need to be 10. It should be sooner. If the ego's out of it and they realize there was a really educational reason to make a change, you make the change. It's all about having an open mind, and there shouldn't be a time frame on that. And that is, if I see something to what Scott was talking about, hey, this one team keeps, producing better results. I don't care if I'm in it for 6 months. I that's worth talking to, because maybe they're doing something I'm not, and it could be something real simple, and I'll make some changes within my program. So that should be part of your baked in philosophy, is that being your own worst critic. Is, when what can I do better? And I think that's part of being a lifelong learner, is that you realize that what you're doing now can always be improved.
You know what? I think it depends on who's making the hiring decision, right? In our industry,
Sure.
It could be like, it depends. Like, my guy, right? What does my guy or my girl, like, you know them for 8 months, you think that they can get the job done because you're cool, right? You go and have a couple pops together, and that person can talk the language. Hey, here you go. I'm gonna present you. Not saying that person can't handle it, can't do it. But when you look at, zoom out and you look at the broader perspective in terms of, there's 2 questions here. It's like, how long does someone need, how much experience does someone need to have, and how long should it take, as Scott asked? And then the second question is that person ready for said position? Is that person ready to be able to handle the tasks that position is going to demand? And I think at the end of the day, as you talked about, Scott, you got your programming, right? Can you check these boxes just in terms of being able to handle your weight room duties, but we know it is so much bigger than your weight room duties, right? Whether you succeed or not, right? And then that's another thing. Like, how do you define success? Like, I like to think that I've did some of my best work on losing teams. Why? Because you're always trying to figure it out. I'm bringing Scott Hopson in. We got to figure this out. Scott, come on in, right? You remember that 2008? Man, we spent a bunch of time together. You're always trying to figure out how can you get better. And so you do your best job. You come up on the short end of the stick. Now we're all in this together. There's no free pass on my end as a performance coach or anybody else's for that matter. You're in it together. You win together, you lose together, right? That's how it should be. However, we know that things can go. People have different motives, and there's different drivers for decisions that are made when it comes to what success looks like for that given year. Is it injury rate? And it changes all over. It just changes from like person to person, leader to leader. I mean, it just changes, right? So like, I'm saying all this because when you look at how long it takes to prepare to run your room, that's one thing, right? When you look at the skill set that you need, it's oftentimes going to extend way beyond that skill set of your weight room skills. And then lastly, how is success defined? What does that look like? Give me a sense of like, hey, you know what? Regardless of wins and losses, you did your job. And this was a great job that you did, or this is a poor job that you did.
Yeah, great point, Duane. Is that when you feel you've done your best job, may not have been the best win and loss season. And it's unfortunate. I think that's the unfortunate part of this business.
Sure is.
You made me think of 2004-05, one men's rugby team, Chicago. And we got to the national final, which is a big deal. You know, it's not a contact sport, it's a collision sport, right? Rugby's a collision sport. You're designed to run over each other. And we had zero non-contact soft tissue injuries. And the head coach, he couldn't care. It was wins and losses. I was like, no, do you understand that we've got two teams, we've got 15 people per team, we've got 10 reserves. I've got 50 guys that are battering each other 5 days a week. They've the 9-month season, they've gone to, and no one had a non-contact soft tissue injury. Not a groin pull, not a calf strain, not a rolled ankle. I was so happy, but no one else cared. But I'll always remember it as probably one of my greatest seasons as the strength conditioning coach. I was like, I just took a collision sport and no one got hurt unless they got pounded by someone else. That's all I remembered. It was like, that's a great year for performance.
Right.
At the end of the season, our best players were still playing, you know?
Right.
Makes a big difference. I can think of a year where we were having a very successful year and one of our team captains got hurt. And I can look back and say that one player was probably the difference maker in us advancing to where we could have been. One player.
Right. And what an awful feeling. Right? What an awful feeling that player goes down and you know how much they contribute and how much they affect the game. And boom, you're like, oh, and then everything that you've done or everything your team has done, your performance team, it's in question, right? It's in question because that key person weren't able to keep him healthy. So.
What else I just brought up for me, Duane, is this, we don't talk about it too much, but in the off season, if your team is lucky enough to have that, like I do a lot of tennis and there is no off season. It's 365. It's insane. You know, 14-year-olds playing 350 days of the year with the same reoccurring injuries as a 25-year-old pro has at 14. But if you have a seasonal sport, how many of your athletes have got their own trainer outside doing their own thing for anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks, depending on the sport? Then when they come back, you actually don't know what your foundation is.
Yes.
You have no reference point on what they have or haven't done. And even if you ask them, you don't know you're going to get the truth. You don't know the ingredients. So you might say this is foundation phase 1, but for them, it's not. They're already overtrained and under recovered for all you know. That's a big part of it, is people getting their own outside. And it's unavoidable.
Yeah.
You know, this has been a great conversation, and I think the insights have been a lot different than we normally do on this podcast. But I want to ask both of you some recommended reading materials for our listeners. Books.
Okay,
What would you
I'm going to jump out right based on the topic. Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed. Incredible. He's a 3-4-time Olympian. Then he became a journalist. Now he's an author, and he talks about collective intelligence and divergent thinking and how other industries have evolved by actually just what we were talking about. So Matthew Syed, Rebel Ideas, I think, doesn't matter what your role or industry, I think it's critical, really critical.
Yeah, I would say I love Atomic Habits. I think that's just a great book. I'm just looking at my library here, The Power of Moments. I have, so based on this conversation, CEO Next Door, that's another great book. It just helps you think differently. I think a lot of times as professionals, we tend to see things from our perspective, just solely our perspective. And one thing that I challenge people to do is to begin to try to see things as a CEO would see things, to see things as, the person who you might be reporting to sees things, to see things as the people who may be underneath you, how they see things. I think it's critically important when you look at the areas of perspective, right? Perspective, because it truly changes a lot and can add. It can sharpen your lens, just like that camera lens. You want a tack sharp picture, right? You got to get a tack sharp. You got to get a lens and a camera body that's going to help to deliver that. So getting those books, in my opinion, can help with a tack sharp perspective.
Ted, I'm going to jump in and give my first book recommendation on this podcast. I was doing a end of the year radio show for one of our football coaches, and one of the guests in the audience heard me present. He said, "I want to send you a book that I think can expand your thoughts and the way you think." And he sent me this book called Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, I believe. It is a deep, thick sandwich to digest, but it's something that helped me to see life and our global world in a different way. Yep. Ted, you got one, and then we'll wrap this show up.
Oh, I think I've really enjoyed today's podcast. Good information, and I'm going to go out and get a couple of those books that were recommended.
All right. Well, I appreciate you all. Thank you so much, Duane, Scott, Ted. You're the best. Look forward to maybe another one of these with us shortly.
Cheers,
Well, thank you for having us.
Yeah,
right.
I appreciate this dialogue, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, thank you.